Okay, good evening and welcome to tonight's meeting of the Economy and Place Policy and Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Callum Taylor and I'm the committee chair. Welcome to those who are with us in the room and the remote speaker who's waiting, and once again to the millions watching all around the world. We'll get straight into business. Are there any declarations of interest? No, silence is golden. So we'll move on to the next item, which is the minutes from the last meeting. Are there any amendments or comments that people might want to raise on those minutes? Okay, none from members. I do have one thing to mention, or at least ask the Democratic Services Officer, which is the recommendations resolved from the Res Park item. I think it would be helpful if we can have a chase on that to the relevant member and officers, because I'm not quite sure where we are with all 6 of those recommendations. And the meeting was it? Yeah, mid-November. So plenty of time for some progress on at least some of them, I think. If members are okay with that. Thank you. Cheers. Okay, which then brings us to public participation. We only have one speaker tonight, and that's Flick Williams, who is speaking to us remotely about the public realm update. Flick, can you hear us?
I can. Good evening.
Hiya, Flick. So you know the drill. You've got 3 minutes, but I'm not going to be over the top with that. If you go over a little bit, I'm quite relaxed about it.
Thank you. On 12th of September last, York Disability Rights Forum wrote to the council about a number of issues regarding accessible toilet provision. These included broken locks at Union Terrace and Coppergate, unsuitable signage to report problems being too high up and too small print. Also reported was the filthy state of many of the toilets, including at Silver Street and Rougier Street, as well as Union Terrace, with evidence of their misuse for drug taking and antisocial behaviour. St George's Field, accessible toilet, currently underwater, is impossibly difficult to access independently owing to the positioning of the pillar at the entrance. The removal last summer of the pronounced lip at the doorway of the Silver Street toilet was welcomed, but this is the only tangible improvement that has been made. In reality, on any given day, disabled people's best chance of finding a clean, accessible toilet remains the Explore Library if it's open, or within the foot streets, the 3rd floor of Marks and Spencer, which is not, of course, publicly funded provision. Furthermore, whilst Changing Places toilets feature on the city centre access plan, Customer and Corporate Services Management Scrutiny, when reviewing the plan last November, were unable to look at this element despite a lengthy 3+ hour meeting. A motion was passed at council in July 21 committing to improve the provision, and the announcement of £244,000 of funding awarded for this made in April 22, yet there is no discernible progress. There is concern that proposed locations such as Castle Museum and the Art Gallery have limited opening hours, and we have not been able to obtain any assurances that any provision will not be behind a paywall or available to those who are not customers of these venues. And let us not forget, not all accessible toilets are created equal. The dimensions of the 2 toilets in the newly refurbished Guildhall are very different. Many of us need more space for transfers directly from a wheelchair. I was refused access to the Changing Places toilet by the receptionist, who told me to use the toilet by the cafe, which I could not because the dimensions are too small. How can this be when the refurbishment was paid for with council taxpayer money? More barriers. The Take a Seat initiative, whereby businesses are encouraged to sign up and make seats and toilets available for non-customers, may work for some, but not for those whose impairment and mobility aids require the dimensions and facilities provided only by Changing Places toilets. The poor level of current provision is a bad business plan for the city. Many disabled people, myself included, avoid eating and drinking whilst we are out and about as a result. Think about that, members, as the business balance of the city shifts away from retail towards drinking and dining. So I would invite you to consider, are we getting value for money for the 96k spent annually on the external contract for toilets? Thank you.
Thank you for that, Flick. Lots of interesting and concerning comments there, which I'm sure the committee will jump into on the relevant agenda item. But before you go, I just want to check with members if anyone has any questions to put to Flick. Councillor Cuthbertson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Could Ms Williams remind us of the venue at which she was asked to go to the toilet behind or by the reception, which was actually too small?
That's in the Guildhall, Councillor Cuthbertson.
Right.
So I'm not quite sure what the arrangement is with the science park at the university, who have now of course now leased that part of the Guildhall. But it seems to me that, you know, if people need the larger facility, they should be able to, you know, be allowed access to it.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I think it's worth a question to one of the executive or perhaps the university who are responsible for it. So I'll undertake to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you both. And Flick, I think that's all from the committee. Obviously, you're welcome to continue watching from wherever you are, but thank you for your contribution once again. It's always appreciated.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. So that's public participation done. And we'll go into the next item, which is an update on the council's sort of public realm functions. We have had a report on this, so I hope members have had the chance to digest it meaningfully. But before we do go into that, I just want to say for the record that I think this is the third meeting of this committee where there's been a problem with getting reports in a timely fashion. And I'm just a bit fed up, to be honest. Scrutiny matters. It's one of the few opportunities all councillors get to have more involved discussions about council matters. And that's why it's important to have timely reports, both for us and the general public. I think the report we've got is actually quite decent, I should say. And I look forward to that discussion, but it was online a few days late. There's obviously different reasons for each of those cases, but things need to improve. It's not on. Anyway, so we'll get into that item, and I'd like to invite the officers and I think Councillor Widdowson, who's here for this item, public realm. Or are you just here to watch from the back? Come to the table if you like. Yeah, that's fine. We won't bite. Thank you, and thanks for giving us your time this evening. If you like, it'd be good if you could introduce yourselves one by one and maybe give a rough summary of the report. But obviously, as I say, members will have had the chance to read it, and we'll put some questions to you afterwards. You can go in whatever order suits you.
Okay. Thanks very much, Councillor. My name's Ben Grabham, Head of Environmental Services. So I'll let everybody introduce themselves and then I'll talk through the report.
Dave Mee, Ops Manager within Public Realm.
Paul Woodison, Executive Member for Environment and Climate Change.
I'm James Gilchrist. I'm the Director for Environment, Transport and Planning.
Thank you.
Okay,
Fire away, Ben.
Yep. So in relation to the report that's in front of you, it is to provide an update with regards to public realm. Thought it was obviously quite useful to set in context, I suppose, the range of services that are covered by public realm, some of which are probably more obvious than others. So the core functions within the service are obviously highway, verge grass cutting, cleansing across the city, including the emptying of dog and litter bins, cleansing within the city centre, parks and open space management, and public toilets. Within section 7 of the report, we cover probably some of the more wild and wacky areas that extends to as well. You know, cleansing of the A64, management of closed churchyards, obviously opening and closing of the bar walls. So it is a wide range of services that are covered, I suppose, under the banner of public realm. And we thought it was useful to set that out within the report. The other thing to draw attention to is obviously the large amount of support that is undertaken through other means, such as a volunteer network across the city. There are many friends of groups that play an active part in managing and improving the local environment within their local communities. So that's referenced within the report, but also specifically within the second annex of the report, which highlights the work that the environment and community officers do with various members of the community and the hours that equates to right across the city. In terms of the report, there were a couple of questions submitted in advance by the chair, and we've answered those within sections 11 to 14 of the report, focusing on how the performance within the services is monitored, how we're dealing with some challenges in terms of ageing workforce and recruitment pressures, how well the service is equipped to do the roles and tasks that we need to undertake, and that we've covered that off from both a fleet perspective and from an equipment perspective as well. In terms of our vehicle fleet, we are obviously in the midst of a replacement program. We do have 10 new cage vans ready to go into service, and a number of new pieces of kit that we've had within the last 6 months. So 2 new tractors, hedge cutting arm, and then we've also just recently ordered a new mini articulated sweeper for the city centre. In terms of some of the other live matters in relation to I suppose some of the challenges and opportunities that we have as a service, meeting resident demand is always a challenge for an operational service such as ours. And again, one of the challenges is, I think, sometimes the differences by which people hold their local environment and what their views are. You know, there are a number of residents that want to see grass mowed like bowling greens, and others that would like to see grass left longer in areas. In terms of the service, we're looking to, I suppose, continue our journey in terms of adaptability and flexibility, and looking at really mechanisation within the service and moving away from some of our perhaps more traditional practices of the past. And another area we're looking at is around our HGV fleet. We've got a number of vehicles that require a HGV licence. A number of our staff actually have grandfather rights to drive certain vehicles. We do obviously have a number of fully trained HGV drivers, but that is a programme of work that we are looking at not only across public realm, but across our waste services as well. Everything else, I think, is set out within the report. So obviously, unless there's anything that Dave wishes to add, then obviously we'll take any questions or comments that you may have.
Thank you, Ben. Much appreciated. I think before we go into questions, it's probably worth saying on behalf of the whole committee, I'm sure that we really value the work of everyone on the ground across these services. They're not always the most glamorous of jobs, and the British weather probably doesn't help matters either at almost all times across the year. So hats off to all the staff who put the graft in, including yourselves too. You don't have to be getting muddy to be working hard. Anyway, that's the niceties out of the way. I've got Councillor Dave Taylor first for a question. Cheers.
Cheers, Chair. Thank you. And thanks for the report. I've got a few questions about, so comments and questions about this paragraph 14, the live matters, and probably the first one falls to you, Ben. Do you convey to the residents who complain about grass not being cut that 100% of councillors agreed to the pollinator strategy? And I'm noting that the chair's wearing his pollinator strategy jumper for the occasion.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when we're responding to complaints about the service, then we do talk about the challenges that we have in terms of maintaining our local environment. Obviously, the strategies that we're looking to deliver against. But obviously, if a resident has contacted us about grass cutting and a complaint about the frequency of grass cutting, we cover that off within the response. So we'll look to set the context and address the issue that the individual resident has contacted us about. So we make sure it's a balanced response.
Yeah, of course. And furthermore, my concern is not about grass growing on open spaces or verges, but it's grass growing on the road in the detritus, which has not been cleared. Cleared from the gullies and cleared from areas which I think the sweeper machines are not getting to some of these areas. Just can some more work be done on this? And I think if it is a case of sweeping machines not being able to get to them, it might be a case of somebody's got to get out with a spade and shovel those areas that the vehicle can't drive to. You must be aware of this problem.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the challenge that we've got is covering the vast areas of the city that we tried to cover. In relation to the machines that we've got, we've actually got three types of machines. So we've got a large, I suppose the largest road sweeper that we've got. We've also got a medium-sized machine, which is a path sweeper that also can do some of the sweeping within the channels on the road. And then two of the mini sweepers that we have within the city centre. So they are smaller machines articulated so they can get around tight corners, etc., etc.
And do those mini machines only operate in the city centre?
They only operate within the city centre. They will occasionally go outside. So things like Lord Mayor's Walk, outside the bar wall area, along Lord Mayor's Walk, for example. But they're predominantly based within the city centre, and that's predominantly because of the carrying capacities of those vehicles and actually what they can sweep up. So they're more for your small types of litter, your cigarette butts, etc., etc., as opposed to perhaps some of the leaf mulch and detritus that you will see at the side of roads. So we do vary the machines that we use dependent upon the task that's required. In relation to the comment you made before about frequencies and grass cutting, one of the tasks that we're on with now as a service is actually looking at our frequencies in relation to where we cut grass and how we actually dovetail the operations around each other. So things like, for example, looking at where we're collecting waste, so where waste bins are out on the curbside, to make sure that doesn't then interfere with any grass cutting, to make sure that obviously if we've undertaken grass cutting, the teams are blowing material back, and then there's a sweeping schedule around that. So it's not a perfect science, but it's something that we're obviously looking at actively within the service at the moment.
Okay, that sounds promising. I think I'm just going to have to photograph some areas of concern and ask for some reactive responses. I just have one more point or question, which is regarding the HGV drivers. I don't know whether this is one for James or one for you, Ben. So about the HGV training, it's great that the council improves the skill, seeks to improve the skills of workforce. But obviously we do want them to remain as our workforce and not clear off and go and work as an HGV driver somewhere else. So do we have clauses in place to either retain those staff or to claw back the money if they leave after having training that we provide?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, it's a scheme that's recently been set up. So we actually the staff involved have to sign a training agreement with the council. That training agreement lasts for 2 years. So the council will cover the cost of doing the HGV license. Obviously, the individual staff member receives the benefit of obviously an increased skill set, potentially an enhanced job in the future as part of their skills, but there is a training agreement that they have to sign that lasts for 2 years. If they leave within that 2-year period, then there's a recourse for the council to claim back the training costs from the employee.
Satisfied with that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I've got Councillor Cuthbertson and then Councillor Hook.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report, Ben. Very helpful. It did fox me on one issue, which was page 4, item 13, the word articulated mini sweeper. It crunches up all kinds of
Right.
Can you explain, please?
Yes, sorry. So the larger sweepers that we've got, so the road sweepers and the path sweepers are a fixed body. An articulated sweeper actually has the ability to actually move left or right.
Yeah.
So for example, when you're sweeping in the city centre around tight corners or around street furniture, you can actually tilt the front end of the vehicle, whereas the back end of the vehicle remains in the same place. So yeah, so that's the I suppose the science behind it.
Okay, thanks for that. That's very helpful. You mentioned on the very last page of your report, the very last item, West Nooks Water Meadow, in Haxby and Wigginton, and that 4 new friends were inducted and trained as gardeners, and the wildflower area was sized and cuttings removed. I should declare an interest member for Haxby and Wigginton, and my colleague Councillor Pearson is also in that. But I'm assuming that this is the work that's currently being done in conjunction with St Nick's.
Yes, I will divert to Dave on that.
And I'm going to have to say I don't know, but it's this information has come direct from the eco officers, and I know they have different relationships with different partner organisations and at different times.
Would one of those be Ms Johnson?
Yes.
Okay, Matt, thank you. Okay, what I'm concerned about with that area is that not all of the space involved is being dedicated to actual wildflower planted areas. I'm using that word slightly, maybe wrongly, but we've had words like wood meadow, wildflower meadow, and green meadow, and various other expressions. I think it would be really helpful if all the organisations involved could standardise on one name for that, simply so that it can be promulgated by local organisations as well. And I think the question that I've had, and we've had in other parts of the ward, has been the question of tailored cutting or tailored non-cutting in this particular case, and making sure that that contract is adhered to. Can we be clear that that's been sorted out and is going to be happening? I don't want to come back in 3 months' time and say, you know, that cutting that you've just done, it shouldn't have happened, etc., etc.
If you're okay with this, I'll have to come back to you with a commitment from all parties and clarification from all parties.
Fine.
The whole rewilding, wildflowering is created a whole new language that is open to interpretation and misunderstanding. So I completely get the first part. And I also understand that people need the clarity of what's going to happen when.
Okay.
So if I can come back to you by the end of the month, I'm due to speak to Becky tomorrow about a different matter, so I can address this quite quickly.
Well, I'm sure she'll be helpful, as she has been in other ways. I think the other question for me is, if you like, residents' understanding of the level of cutting and the nature of the cut that's required, particularly for these wildflower meadow areas. And the reason I'm saying that is because many residents have the view that an area of green should be rectangular or square, whichever, and it should be cut to within an inch of its life at regular intervals throughout the year. That goes against the grain for the kind of wildflower meadow approach. And I just wondered what our approach should be to publicising that and to making sure that residents understand that, because we had several engagement sessions with residents which were not terribly well attended. And that was a point that was made to all of them. But I still think, there's another 11,000 residents in Haxby and Wigginton who have to understand what this is about.
I think most of the wildflower areas that are being developed in the city are resident led. So in a way, it's putting it back to the residents to share what their ambitions are.
Right.
Because the council isn't changing its frequency of cutting unless there's a response to or working with local residents. So I'm not sure what ward mechanisms or friends mechanisms exist in that locality to pass out that message.
Well, I'm not aware of the friends of Haxby, West Nooks Water Meadow.
Right.
Actually,
probably that of course I accept that might be again loose language. At friends could be individuals.
I'm not being negative.
individuals could be being friendly to the site rather
Yeah.
than a bigger organisation like Friends of Roundtree Park. But I think we try and respond to where residents are asking for particular developments rather than trying to sell it to them as this is what we're changing your
Okay.
grass cutting regime.
In which case, perhaps what I'm asking for is a bit more clarity about the kind of cutting regime and frequency or lack of it
Yeah.
that's needed.
I mean,
here.
what I would be wanting to see is a plan.
Yeah.
And areas coloured in whatever colour are left and cut in particular month.
Yeah.
And the rest of it is cut at this sort of frequency, so that you've got a nice clear plan that you can share with all parties.
Understood. And lastly, I've got a question about the number of corporate days being 56. What does that mean exactly? It's on the page before.
Corporate days are where an organisation, a company, staff come out and work on one of our sites.
Right, okay.
So it's their corporate social responsibility, staff training, informal sort of staff training.
Right, so we're taking advantage of organisations' goodwill in operating, offering some CSR time.
And we're, yes, not taking advantage though, because we're giving
No,
them.
I mean, I didn't mean that in a negative kind of way. Okay, yeah, understood. Thank you for your help. Thank you.
Thank you, councillor Cuthbertson. I think James Gilchrist wants to jump in.
Just to say, just coming back to the point about how spaces are maintained, we are going to do a pilot that Ben can maybe just allude to with the university on some management plans for some of the parks. So, Ben, I don't know, you just want to cover that off, because whilst I'm not saying it will get to every site as part of this pilot, but we're going to try that as a bit of a part.
You got me excited now, James.
Yeah, we got an arrangement in place with the University of York. They're advertising a vacancy at the moment for someone to work with both Dave and myself on establishing a maintenance plan. So initially for the Knavesmire, but looking at then rolling that out potentially to other sites. So we're actually, as part of the work with the university, looking at developing a model using the Knavesmire as our first location, but then once the model is developed, then potentially looking at where that could be rolled out to other locations across the city. So we're looking at obviously doing that pilot this year. The university are advertising that opportunity at the moment with interviews scheduled for February of this year. So yeah, exciting times.
Sounds positive. We need more of that kind of working, really. Councillor Hook, I've got you. Yeah. Councillor Hook, thank you for waiting. I was just going to say, I think I've got a supplementary, and so has Councillor Kilbane, and then we'll go on to what you had, if that's all right. Appreciate your patience. Councillor Kilbane, I'll come to you after my own supplementary on where Councillor Cuthbertson started us. Had a queue, bear with me. So when Councillor Cuthbertson was raising his questions, I was brought to section 14 and harmonising different preferences. I think in terms of we've touched on it. Some people like the grass cutting quite a lot. Some people want to let it be a bit more. And what I'd like to get a clearer idea on, and I'm sure residents would too, is when things like the pollinator strategy are approved, what then happens to that as it works its way through the council machine, and how does that interact with what we then do on the ground? Because so far, and I've said this before, so I'm not going to kick down any doors, I don't think that's quite come through in reality on the ground just yet. I know it's not easy, but I read that and I thought, well, yes, okay, it's good to bring people with us, but if as a council we're saying this is what we want to do, the harmonising thing needs to be more about bringing people with us rather than trying to keep everybody absolutely happy, because that's impossible. If that's the strategy and the direction we want to travel in, are we sort of showing that on the ground? So it's a long question, a bit long-winded, but so yeah, what happens when the pollinator strategy gets approved and its interaction with street level services like grass cutting?
So we actually did a scrutiny, was it late last year or early this year? I can't remember, on pollinator strategy with the climate change scrutiny. It was relatively recently, and we went through all the actions that were in the pollinator strategy. So there has been a very recent scrutiny into that. as you remember from the pollinator strategy, there are a number of actions within that for us to complete. I think when you go through that list, and as I say, we did an updated list for that scrutiny. There were a number of actions and there were positive steps against most of them. Whether that pace is sufficient is obviously a choice, but you can see how the pollinator strategy is influencing either directly in what the council does or by influencing what partners and other people do around the city. So there are steps being taken. What the pollinator strategy in itself didn't do was say we're going to reduce the number of grass cuts or we're going to change this. That was very much left in that pollinator strategy as a ward bottom-up driven approach of how to achieve that strategy. Because there is always that tension that plays out with, as Ben has alluded to, you know, some people will want a wildflower meadow, other people want to walk the dog through it, other people want to play football on it. So getting that balance right has to be done in consultation with communities rather than going, there's a rule for all. There is obviously an opportunity to review things like grass cutting of verges, which people tend not to walk through or play football on or those sorts of things. So there are options to review that, but there haven't been any policy decisions to change that, but they're obviously doable.
Yeah, thank you, James. Councillor Kilbane?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think my question's even a little bit more sort of basic than that, and it's a question really of what Dave alluded to in terms of a map that says where we cut and where we don't cut and when, because I mean there have been some quite high profile cases of council funded wildflower planting that's been cut at the wrong time. I'm not looking at all to a project that you were involved with, Councillor Widdowson, in Hull Road. And certainly for us, you know, we've got a part of the ward where we're looking at doing a bit of sort of grass hay meadowing thing. And the first thing we're going to do is get a few big trunks and lay them down to make sure that the mowers can't get in there, because at the moment, we don't trust the system not to come and cut inappropriately. And I think we need to bottom that out. You know, the left hand needs to know what the right hand's doing. It's further complicated by residents groups doing it and the communication between the council and the residents groups. So with that in mind, if you're doing something on the Knavesmire, please involve the local councillors, because we know the residents group who are doing some wildflowering in that particular area. So, you know, we need to coordinate it better. There needs to be a master plan of what we're doing and where. And if you're not on that plan, then you're going to be on the council scheme. But if you are on that plan, then there's a way of dealing with it. It's got to be in all of our interests for the council to be doing less cutting, you know, surely. But the areas that we're not cutting need to be managed. You can't just leave them and hope for the best. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with inappropriate things growing there. So, you know, so it's a plea really to make sure that there have been numerous occasions where residents groups have been involved in things or ward councillors have been doing things, and that has basically become cut out or turned over by ourselves. In, you know, no ill intent. It's just the way it's been working. So if I can make a plea for bottoming that out, that would be it.
Thank you, Councillor Kilbane. Anyone want to respond to that? Dave?
Yeah, thank you. Part of the reason the Knavesmire was chosen was contact from yourself and a number of other councillors about, you know, the opportunities we have on that piece of land, but also obviously very conflicting or competing, sometimes complementary activities that go on. So the Knavesmire is probably our most complex, outside of Roundtree Park, probably it is the most complex piece of land we have to bottom out all those sort of issues. So it's a very conscious choice to pick somewhere where we have both opportunity and you know, challenges. And as was mentioned, it should perform a template for other sites. It's a fairly simple exercise once you repeat it. We have made mistakes. We have cut bits of grass we shouldn't have. I think obviously those tend to get the headlines because that's a story where you make a success that doesn't, or you achieve something that doesn't make a story quite often.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, Councillor Kilbane, in terms of you know, it's covered off within kind of section 12 of the report, but we've gone through a restructure within environmental services, and part of that is to give us some of the capacity to actually get better at mapping a lot of our activities out. It's been a very kind of traditional service, and we've probably, as a service in the past, been underinvested in technology, and that's one of the things we're looking to address as part of this restructure. So very much take on board some of the comments that you've made, but that is actually addressed as part of the restructure and a piece of work that we've got mapped out for our work programme.
Thank you both. I'll move to Councillor Hook and then Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 4 points, so but I've waited. So.
Yeah.
I do. First of all, sort of continuing on, I just think, as well as community groups, in my bit especially, we've got 7 parish councillors, and if 7 parish councils, and if you were to work closer with the parish councils, that transforms 2 ward councillors into 50 odd councillors, which can a lot more coverage, talking to people, get them to understand exactly what you're about. And okay, I want to tell the parish councillors things, but it would be good to hear it from the horse's mouth a lot of times, and then they can help. And we've got lots of verges in rural West York, because obviously it's rural, and they're different sorts. And it might be that some people might want to adopt the verge outside their house to be wildflower even, but there's an element of planting. You can't just leave it and say we're not going to mow it. You've actually got to do things to it to make it into a wildflower meadow effectively. So everyone needs a bit of help on that and permission to do it, because it's a lot of work. And that sort of brings me on to my second thing, because whether you're the sort of person who's a bit finicky and wants the bowling green, and you go out and that little patch of verge outside your house, you mow beautifully year in, year out, 50 years of doing that, or you're the one who's wanting to do a nice wildflower bit of verge, and then people come along and park on it. Or, well, it all started when Talk came and dug up the whole village to lay their telephone cables, and that wrecked the verges. And after that, all the workers who came to do things said, well, I can park on that verge because it looks horrible anyway, so I might as well drive on it, and to hell with that. And then everyone's hearts get broken because they're doing all this work and it's for nothing. And we get no support whatsoever when we say, how do we stop people parking on our verges? So you've got these lovely verges that we're obviously public realm are putting in a lot of effort, private people are putting in a lot of effort, and then we're being kicked in the teeth because they're inconsiderate people who are wrecking them, and there's nothing we can do about it, and it is heartbreaking. So it would be nice if there was a strategy to sort of something we could do to stop that. And the other thing was the community payback you mentioned. You say it's primarily in the city centre. And I know for one of my villages that's well out of York, right on the edge, is desperate for some community payback because they've got a bit of ground that's never been cleared, and they would really like community payback because in the past they had it and they did a very good job, and they would love to get them back to do a similar job now. So, you know, it would be good to extend that beyond the city centre if there's the resource. So that would be great. So it's basically a plea for my ward. And what was my other bit? Oh, yes, and it would be nice to have a timetable or site of your thing for clearing up leaves, because certainly as I've been walking around my ward, there's an awful lot of bits where you fear to tread because it is that slippery, and it's luckily not been frosty recently. Well, it has today, so you haven't got the ice added to it, but just wet leaves are a real slip and trip hazard. And it would be nice to know that at this time you've got a schedule that you're going to clean that road, and the councillors can say, oh, you should be doing that road as well because that road's always covered in leaves. So that's my 4 bits, please. But yeah, from the outer parts of the city.
I mean, there's a fair bit there. But go on,
There is.
James.
I think just on the verge parking, obviously that's something Scrutiny's over the years have looked at on several occasions. Department for Transport have talked about launching a consultation to look at outlawing pavement and verge parking. They did some work on it pre-COVID. It hasn't reappeared from them. It risks causing as many problems as it solves. It not in all locations, but in some locations, it potentially removes the ability to park if you're going to park on. Currently, people verge park or pavement park, which allows traffic through. So obviously, if you ban it, then you potentially cause more parking pressure than already exists. So it does need to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. Within York, we do that on a case-by-case basis. So certainly, I think at least some of the councillors within the room will have done ward schemes where we've installed wooden bollards down the side of Prasburges to stop parking. So we do that with ward councillors and ward schemes. So more than happy to have a conversation about those. I'll let Ben talk about community payback, but obviously they are a service we work with and ask them to do things. We don't have necessarily the same powers of instruction. I don't know, Ben, whether you want to pick up that and the timetable for clearing leaves or.
It's me. Not as a user. I link into payback. And as James just said, they choose where they work. So if you want, I'll email you you've got my contact details, so we can get in touch afterwards to pass the details on, but it's entirely up to payback whether the venue you've got meets what they want to achieve, the ability to get their clients to that venue and to supervise what goes on. So it's their gift as to whether they take that opportunity up. In terms of outer city areas, I know they have done work in Dunnington. So they do leave the city centre.
You picking up the rest there, Ben?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the leaf clearance and schedules, the teams are actively out every day doing leaf clearance work now. Obviously using the kind of blowers, leaf vacuums, and the road sweepers. So that kind of happens on a kind of cyclical basis. We are doing some work with highway services at the moment where there's certain road closures in place for gully work. So what we're actually doing is dovetailing in with that so that we actually go in and do the leaf clearance in those areas. So we are kind of following a program as we get round. One of the things, again, that we referred to as part of the restructure that we're looking at is to improve that mapping capability so that we can release kind of more detailed schedules. So that is on the kind of work program and something we are keen to pick up as we move forward. So there isn't something that exists at the moment on that, but it is something that we're looking at addressing through the restructure.
Okay. Thank you. Is this a supplementary, Councillor Cobain? Cool.
Can I say, have we done less leaf clearing this year? Because I don't know if it's just anecdotal, but a lot of residents are saying that there seems to be leaves seems to be hanging around a lot longer. Is that because we've done less, or is that because of the weather, or what's the reason?
Yeah, it's sorry, it's in terms of some of the challenges. It's certainly not that we've done any less of it. We've got as many, all the resources committed to that we have in previous years. The challenge we've had this year is some of the weather that we've had with an incredibly wet period. It's obviously made the leaves very wet and mulchy and sticky, whereas I suppose from our staff would say that they want cold, dry, frosty mornings because it makes the leaves easier to clear. So it certainly has been more of a challenge, and we are looking at extending our leaf clearance program by a couple of weeks actually as a result of that, because we are, as a result of the weather, a few weeks behind where we would hope to be or where we would be in a normal in inverted brackets year. So we are aware of that, but there's no less resources committed to that, Councillor Cobain.
And I think, just being a bit of a geek as I can be sometimes about that, the leaf fall's triggered by two things. It's partly day length, but it's also temperature. And I think actually what we're seeing is leaf fall changing, which is linked to climate change, in my opinion. I think we're seeing leaf fall later in the year and over a much longer period than we would have historically. Historically, we'd have had a few cold snaps and all the leaves come down. And even in my career, you're starting to see that drag on much more as we're not getting the cold snaps earlier in the autumn winter period. Autumn mornings used to be cold, frosty mornings. They're not anymore.
Thank you. Councillor Daubney.
Thank you, Chair. Very quick question, Ben. You like this? Could you explain what grandfather rights are for me, please?
Yeah, if you're of a certain age like myself, it means that you have the ability to drive a 7.5-ton vehicle on your driving license, whereas if you passed after 1999, you don't have that entitlement on your license. So a lot of our older staff have that entitlement, whereas a lot of our younger staff don't. They have to go through the full HGV training program. So that's the difference. So apologies, that wasn't spelled out in the report.
Well, thank you. I've got that right too. So if you need me, just you know the number.
Councillor Kilbane.
Just moving on to a different topic, if that's okay. I'm wondering if we can bottom out this electric caged vans story that's been all over the press and the national press lately. So it's just so that we can be clear for everybody really. Can you let us know, how many we've got that are not in service, when they are coming into service, the reasons they're not in service, all the issues that have been being asked in the media. And the other question is about the reliability, because I know we had an issue with some of the electric waste collection vehicles that would cut out in wet conditions. Are we sure that these ones are going to be more reliable than they were?
I'll start off because I've got the email open in front of me, which was sent to me today with the latest update, so I can probably quote the latest figures. So we've got 16 of the electric vehicles in use, 22 are at Hazel Court or Harewood Wyn in the process of being deployed. There are 11 vans for building services which are out at Hesse, having the racking and the specialist vehicles fitted to them. The bit that's been in the news is the charging infrastructure project is about a month behind schedule. So the idea was that vehicles would arrive at the same time as the charging infrastructure, and we've got about a month's gap. Now, you could say, well, you shouldn't have ordered the vehicles then, but actually if we'd waited, the price of the vehicles is going up for electric vehicles at such a rate that we'd have paid. They're already worth more now sat in the depot than they were when we bought them. So the demand for them is such that they are significant. So I think it's sort of a slight timing issue of a slight delay in the works with the electrical works at Hazel Court, where we discovered that some of the cabling wasn't in ducts as it was shown on the plans. They're on their way, and there is a month's delay in deployment, but in the grand scheme of things, that's manageable from our end. We are looking at some options for alternatives, so we're talking both to First and to Autohorn about whether they can help us with some charging infrastructure to deploy those sooner. And I think there's been some conversations this week about how we can deploy those even sooner. I don't know if you want to touch on the waste bin, because I know you've been close to that, Ben.
Yeah, just in relation to that, we've got a meeting with Autohorn on Friday, and then looking at bringing a couple of the vans into service next week for public realm. So those vehicles are ready to be deployed into service. In relation to the electric bin wagons, we've got 2 electric bin wagons. I think there have been a few reliability issues with those. They have been back to Dennis Eagle, who are the manufacturer, for some kind of refits and works. Those vehicles are both back in the service and operating absolutely fine. So they're now back with us. All the costs associated with that, including hire vehicles, were at Dennis's expense and not the council. So just want to make that clear.
And I think the reason we bought 2 and not all of the fleet as electric vehicles is for exactly that point. They are a pilot and a lessons learned piece rather than going fully electric for HGVs in one foul swoop. The marketplace for electric vans is a lot more mature than it is for HGVs in terms of electric vehicles.
Thank you. Don't know if I've got anyone waiting. Do you have one more, and then I'll go for a few? Well, I'll go and then you can go. Nice one, thanks. Very briefly, and maybe I should know the answer to this, but goose scarers. Sounds like a band I might like, but what do they? I'm guessing they don't just run up to the geese, do they? Is that?
Yeah,
Councillor Dauburney's just said it, you run up to one and go boo. But no, so you have to sneak up on them, otherwise running up defeats the object. It's within the Friends of Round, it's a subgroup within the Friends of Roundtree Park. When the park shuts and it's still sort of dusk, before the geese settle down for the night, a team go in to sort of shoo them out of the park.
Right, okay. Well, that's that then. Thank you. Councillor Kilbane?
So there was a trial with lasers, wasn't there, on geese a while back? Now I'm also wondering, one resident suggested to me, sorry, I'm the councillor for Micklegate Roundtree Park, is one of the councillors, that he said that when he was a kid, there was never any geese in there, but then dogs were allowed off the lead. And it made me think, well, if you could take in, when it's closed, dogs and let them off the lead, would that work?
This has also been subject to a scrutiny, and I'm scarred by, I think probably twice it's been through scrutiny, how to manage the city's geese. The good news is we have resident foxes most of the time. The geese ignore them completely because they'll just fly off and come back, you know, or the geese are just too, you know, 7 geese against 1 fox isn't probably a fair fight, so I think. Dogs, people have used trained sort of border collies to shoo geese elsewhere. Obviously, the issue then is public relations when one decides to actually try and eat a goose or several geese, and what's the council's reputation there? So we go for, you know, humane shooing rather than scaring to death.
Thank you for that. I've one more question, very different subject, and I'll come back to Councillor Kilbane if I may. The public speaker focused on public toilets, and there were all sorts of points raised, largely around accessibility. I think the most pertinent question though was, do we think we're getting value for money out of the 96k? I'm guessing that's a year that the contract's worth. Open to views on that. I mean, I know I've had in my ward issues with the company in Westbank Park. That things have changed a little bit because the volunteer at the neighbouring bowls club has become a quasi staff member for them. So he's always there to look after those toilets. But across the whole city, we often pick up grumbles about public toilets. So open to views on that, really. How do we think it's going with them?
I'll come in because I'm the principal lead into the contractor. First thing, the budget, the 95k is not what we pay the contractor. That's the cost of running the service, which includes sort of property rentals, because we don't own all of the premises. And there are a number of costs associated with that. Obviously, value for money is subjective. We are halfway through a something like 15-year contract, which required the contractor to provide capital investment into the facilities. There's definitely ups and downs with the quality of service, which in part reflects their staffing issues, but also users' misbehaviour. We have had a considerable amount of ASB this year, which is manifesting things not being cleaned, but also toilets not being opened because they've been broken into, and theft of the cash taking place. People gluing, classic one would be to glue up a lock. So there's a mixture of situations and circumstances in place. In the past, we had considerable complaints about the quality at Silver Street and Coppergate until we made a major investment in there, and that definitely changed my post bag. So it's something we do keep an eye on with them and meet with them. The comments made by the lady at the start of the meeting, for a variety of reasons I'm not really sure about, it didn't get to me until mid-December, and I've replied to all of those points in an email just after Christmas, and I've asked to meet. I've already met with the contractor about things like signage and accessibility barriers, and I'm due to go back to that lady to seek a further meeting to seek sort of user guidance on where things aren't right for people. So now I'm aware of the issues, I can act on them, but it wasn't really fed through to me from early days.
Okay, thank you for that, Dave. And so in terms of those issues raised, are you confident that we'll get to a place where concerns around accessibility are sufficiently addressed.
I would certainly hope so. I mean, each site has probably there's a common thing, like the signage is common across the whole estate. Healthmatic use a standard sign across probably for the whole company. So I can go back to their MD and say, right, it's been brought out here. We've got an issue with accessibility, location, height, and we can address that. Across the estate. There won't be any debate or quibble about buying new signs. It's not the company they are. Other things, maybe physical change is required, and without knowing the exact detail per site, I can't give you a guarantee, because it may just be structurally impossible. In which case, we shouldn't then maybe be labelling it as a fully disabled accessible toilet. So I just need to look at every site on a case-by-case basis. For example, just not through this route, but it was brought to my attention that at Silver Street, if you go into Gents, which is on the left, the door is narrow, the swing doors are narrower than the ladies on the right, which means it's not wide enough for a dad or male carer to take a buggy through. Whereas if it's a lady taking a child into the toilets with them, they can get through. So I've met Healthmatic last week. They're going to make the space to move the doors out, make the supporting pillars out, so the swing doors will open. So I can work on things once I get to know the actual location problem.
Thank you, Dave. Any supplementaries on that, Councillor Kilbane?
Yeah, just one for Councillor Widdowson. The lady from York said York Disability Rights Forum wrote on the 12th of September. Just wondering why it took so long to come to Dave's attention, if it didn't come to his attention until December.
From what you just said, are you saying that the email came to me on the 12th of September?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah.
In which case I would have sent it on that day or 24 hours later, because that's how long things stay in my inbox. I don't know why it didn't get to Dave's attention then, but we can look into it. Chair, I think James wants to say something.
Yeah, sorry, thank you.
No, so I was just going to say, it's as much a message to Dave as it is to the committee, but obviously we've now got the access officer appointed and working in the council. And I know he's been given a work programme to work on, but I think if you're doing the meeting, I'll drop you an email with a name, Dave. But I think it'd be useful to include our access officer in those discussions with Healthmatic. It obviously brings a bit more power to your elbow, as it were. So we'll include the access officer in those discussions.
Yeah, that sounds positive. Another thing for the access officers list, quite a large list, I think. But I do appreciate the positive intention in the responses and the eye to find solutions. One question on this, and then I'll bring in Councillor Kilbane and Councillor Pearson, is: are you able to talk about break clauses in that contract in this meeting? Like, can we end that contract if we're not happy with how they're performing on things like accessibility grounds? I'm only asking because I've never seen it.
That probably isn't a reason to break the contract, because it's ultimately our buildings. So it might still reside, some of the issues may reside with us as the provider of the building.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I think there probably are break clauses for performance, but you'd need to make sure that the performance was what was spec'd in the contract and not something that we hold the underlying liability for. So if there's an investment programme needed to address accessibility issues, the way the contract's written, that's probably not on Healthmatic's list. It's probably with us to resolve, which is Dave said he's trying to do as best he can.
Okay.
So a break clause would be like failure to open, failure to operate, failure, significant failure to clean. Yeah. That's more likely a break clause,
Well, of course, but I was more thinking a refusal to, once you've had these discussions about these particular cases, if we find ourselves in the same position 6 months down the line, and there's bits of those solutions that they need to do that are not doing, I'm just interested to know if the council have any leverage to have a sense of consequences about lack of action. But I hear what you're saying. I have supplementaries, I think. And were you on something different, Councillor Pearson? Okay, Councillor Kilbane and then Councillor Pearson.
Thanks, Chair. So the public speaker was saying that on many occasions, or the only reliable accessible toilet in the city is in Explore Library. or the third floor of Marks and Spencer's, and we all know how long the managers of Marks and Spencer's have joked about how they provide the public toilets for the people of York, but obviously they're sort of limited time. So the issues that were being raised, a lot of them are not going to go away, are they? Sort of antisocial behaviour, drug misuse, etc. in those toilets. So we need to come up with a way of dealing with that, because at the moment, if you've only got, if you need a disabled loo, and people who need disabled loos quite often need them more immediately than people who don't need them, and you can't rely on there being one available to you in the city centre, and you're certainly thinking that sort of after, you know, the library shut, then you're not going to be able to access one, then it will stop you coming into the city centre for any length of time. And obviously we want people to come into the city centre and spend a lot of time there and use the facilities available. So I'm just wondering, given that we know what the issues are, and given that we know that that's not going to change, and given that we've had the £244,000 from Changing Places sometime last year, I can't remember when. What's the plan? What's the plan to make sure that there's a usable, accessible toilet available for people at all times when they come into the city centre?
So, sorry, Dave, I'm stealing your thunder, but so we've done a lot of work with the police on the vandalism and drug misuse piece. So we've made some high-profile arrests. I do feel for some of the staff that have to work in those facilities, because they do come across some pretty horrific cases on a fairly regular basis. One of the other things that we are looking at is whether, and this has controversial elements to it, so don't throw it straight back at me, because we are just looking at it, but whether actually making some of the toilets cashless would reduce the vandalism, which inevitably closes some of them. But obviously that makes them less accessible to some people at the same time. But it is something we are looking at and talking to Healthmatic about. Dave, I don't know if you wanted to list how many toilets there are. There are quite a few disabled toilets in the city.
I think so there's multiple solutions and multiple responses. Those, you know, Jane Mowat was leading on a project around Union Terrace at the Groves, ASB, which has impacts on the toilets. Two significant arrests were made of people who were the current ringleaders of the problem, but obviously other people could come in and start causing problems. So I accept that point. I'm sort of involved on sort of slightly parallel basis with the new Changing Places toilet project. So I'm working with that team, which name escapes me, but I'm working on the individuals, but not the team name, on where these new facilities would go, because I think there's some assumptions made in the statement that where they're actually going to go, because it's not 100% certain yet. Like inside the museum, well, the museum was a target area, but where within that wider complex the toilet goes, you know, is yet to be determined. So the council bid for some money. It's been given the money. They've got permission to spend it next financial year, and the project team are working up options for using that money to improve the estate. And when I know more, I've given a commitment to go back to that lady to say, this is what's proposed, and the team that leading it know they need to consult with users. So I really hope we'll not be in the same situation in 6, certainly not in 12 months' time. Now, there's another issue which I put back to the council, is that the current toilet provision closes at generally 6 o'clock or 5 o'clock, depending on where you are, because that's what we chose to pay Healthmatic to open to those hours. So if you want to follow a wider coverage, then it's going to cost more money to open later, because they've got to deal with the staffing and opening and closing.
Thank you, Dave. Councillor Widdowson.
It's a really good point, Councillor Kilway, you know, and it may be, given the changing economy that we've got right the way across the city, that during the work with the new types of toilets that we're talking about, actually we need to revisit what the opening hours are and what that would then cost us and what we can or we cannot afford. So, you know, this is really, really interesting debate and brings up some very good points that will support what we're doing.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the nature of the discussion as well. Councillor Pearson, you've been very patient. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, no, I was just reflecting on the various different elements of the work of the public realm team and how varied and diverse it is. And I think I'm looking through it and thinking over the last 4 years of being a councillor, each issue has probably come up at least once, different years, different weather, different problems, pandemics, all the rest of it. They've all brought their own challenges. But I was thinking that a very recent one is like the river flooding. You've talked already about how weather conditions have perhaps delayed or prolonged your leaf clearance programme. When the river floods, it obviously leaves a load of mud and detritus behind. Presumably that means you have to pull resources from other jobs. What's your sort of like business continuity plan? Have you got a strategy for that? And how do you adapt and flex your resources on a day-to-day basis?
Yes, good question, guys. So it's something that we do daily in terms of our workforce and try to ensure that our workforce is as multitasked and multi-trained as possible. So, you know, a lot of our general operatives are skilled in various different areas because there's a seasonality element to their work. You know, for example, they'll be grass cutting in the summer and then doing obviously winter works, flooding, de-leafing in the winter, whereas in the summer they're grass cutting. So it is, you know, a range of tasks. In terms of obviously our resource, then we will prioritise that dependent upon the needs. So obviously our teams are reactive and we work closely with colleagues in highway services who are the main response for flooding, but we will obviously help and undertake those tasks. So we will dovetail in relation to our sweeping activities, to our staff that, you know, will perhaps be doing emptying litter bins or dog bins, will actually drop onto other work to ensure that we can ensure that the city gets back on its feet after a flooding event as quickly as possible, and then we will drop back onto some of our other tasks after that. So it is something that we do and something that obviously changes season to season and almost day to day, if I'm honest.
I'm just thinking about, once we're talking about this, we're able to ask you these questions and understand the problem. Are we good enough at communicating when we have these difficulties and ensuring that residents are aware that bin collections or leaf clearing might take a bit longer because of X, Y, and Z? Are we being proactive enough about that communication?
Yeah, I think in relation to that, then yes. I mean, every day there's a section on the council's website. So if we do have any issues with waste collection, for example, that's probably our you know, the area that receives most contact. Then there's a part of the website that shows where refuse, recycling and garden waste collections are up to on a particular day, and if there've been any access issues, any challenges that we've had. In relation to public realm, it tends to be more around if we're delayed on a particular programme, then we will obviously put notification out to all councillors. Again, one of the things that I suppose is you know, part I would say of that is, as part of the restructure, we are looking at recruiting an operations manager. We are actually, I suppose, a post light within public realm. So I would, you know, I fully accept that sometimes communication perhaps isn't as quick as it could be, but that is something that we're going to address as part of the restructure.
Thank you. I just have one more question about Councillor Kilbane, and then we'll try and wrap up unless something really unusual or interesting is said. I want to talk about the farm tenancies on the strays very briefly. I'm no expert on farming. I certainly won't pretend to be, but generally speaking, farmers are under quite a lot of pressure these days, and I'm wondering just how secure those farm tenancies are in the sort of medium to long term, because it's their work on the strays is really handy in terms of natural maintenance. I've got Hob Moor in mind for myself, but there's other parts of the city. Is this something that will hopefully remain for years to come, or?
I'm not. No. I'm one removed from this. I'm going to have the client for this aspect of the service, but it's all handled through property colleagues who use a commercial agricultural letting company as the go-between with the farmers. At the moment, we don't appear to be under sort of say stress of people not wanting to use the land. I would suggest that probably is down to the price that they're prepared to pay, though. So, if, you know, we may be taking more of a hit on what income we get in order to secure somebody to graze the land.
Yeah.
And we've just come out of environmental stewardship this last couple of years, but what that's done is help set sort of the right quota or beasts on the land for so long. So in case of Hobmore, it might be 30 between these days or 60 between these days. And the main grazier is very cooperative about complying with that. And another local farmer is quite interested in additional hay cropping from one of our sites that's not been used for hay crop for some time. So it seems, anecdotally, it seems to be still robust.
Cool, thank you. Did you have anything to say? Sorry, James. Councillor Kilbane.
And always a treat to see the cows on Hobmore, isn't it, as you go over it. Thanks. Just a couple of questions. One quite quick, I think, which is to do with staffing numbers. How many full-time equivalents do we have on street cleaning? And how many full-time equivalents do we have on the estate worker service?
I'll come to that. I'll answer the second part first. Within the estate worker services, 6 FTs across the land. In relation to cleansing, I would say that answer is probably more mixed in that we've got obviously general operatives that are trained for various different activities. So some of that might involve cleansing. They may be doing other works during part of the year. So within the city centre, we've got a dedicated team of 12 FTEs. And obviously that's a 7-day-a-week service. Within the overall public realm service, we've got 65 staff. That includes the city centre team and the estate workers that I've mentioned. So it isn't, I can't break the staffing number down to say there are X number of staff that are dedicated to cleansing, but it's within that number, Councillor. I hope that addresses the question.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And sort of following on from that, really, we know anecdotally and also from previous scrutinies, there is a feeling that the city streets are getting dirtier. Do we have any way of being able to measure that? Do we know whether or not the performance is getting worse or if the performance is getting better? Because we are hearing it from a lot of different quarters. And what do you think of that, really? Do you think they're getting dirtier or they're the same or improving?
I'll take the lead on that. So I think there's a couple of points I'd make. Generally, you know, it feels like every few months York is voted the nicest place to live or, you know, the best place to visit. So we're not getting it totally wrong. And I think we won an award last year for being one in the top 10 cleanest cities in the UK. So I don't think it's getting worse. I think the nature of a historic environment and street scene makes cleansing more difficult. So actually where you've got changes in levels, York stone paving with larger cracks, you get more detritus than you would do if you'd got a brand new concrete slabs laid with a millimetre between them. You get more detritus. It makes cleansing slightly more difficult. Ben can talk about it, but we have started to change and work with the bid on a deep cleanse approach with the bid, where actually we go into areas and do a deep cleanse. So we did King's Square earlier in the year. We put together a plan with the bid. We worked together with the bid on how we did a deep cleanse. And I think that sort of working our way through the city to do a spring clean on a regular basis in different locations will help address that it's no different to your house in a way, you know. Brush the duster past it every once in a while, every now and again you need to do a deep cleanse, and I think the same is true for our city as well. So I think that sort of approach and the bid help with the cleaning city centre. So it's making sure that we're joined up with the bid in their cleansing regimes as well.
So that's just in the bid area, I take it.
Yeah.
Councillor Kilbane.
I'm not sure I entirely buy the idea that it's because we're an old city that we look dirtier, because we've been an old city for quite a long time. But be that as may, I think I'm glad to hear about working closely with the bid, but accepting the caveat that will just be in the bid area, which of course is not where most residents live. And I think, you know, the plan, if we do deep clean somewhere, to keep on top of it, you know, because the state of the city streets, they're deeply dirty, you know, so a brushing over them doesn't bring them up because they just by and large look filthy. And the other way, and you may be able to comment on this, Ben, because we've had some correspondence about this lately. At the moment, it seems to be it is a reactive service. to a lot of the time. And that will then depend upon who shouts loudest and first as to what bits of streets get clean. And, you know, I'm quite fortunate to have some residents who prefer to shout and get the bits of their streets clean. But, you know, it's kind of, we need more than that, don't we? Because there does appear, it appears to me anyway, in my short time in this old city, I've only sort of lived here for about 35 years, that it is getting dirtier.
Yeah, I didn't say the streets are getting dirtier because they've got historic streets. They are harder to maintain because I didn't agree with you that they're getting dirtier. So
But that's always been the case, hasn't it?
yeah, and they are harder to maintain than a city that has perfectly level streets. So you need more resource into them to keep them at the level you want to keep them at. So historic streets will collect more detritus than perfectly level streets. I think it comes back to that. We try to maintain a visit schedule to streets in terms of cleansing. So they're on the website. There is a certain amount of that is subject to exactly the point that Councillor Pearson was raising. So yes, we try to visit streets as per that schedule, but we're probably off it at the moment with flood response and cleanup. So there is an underpinning schedule. What also happens though is that the deterioration rate varies across the city. So where you've got whatever it is, 8.5 million visitors to the city centre, the deterioration rate in terms of how quickly that needs a cleanse will be very different from a residential street further down. The deterioration rate will be different, how long it takes till you next need to visit. So there's a certain amount, and that's changing all the time, of course. It only needs a new housing development and that deterioration rate will change. So keeping that under review and flexing that resource is an important part of what Ben and his team do in terms of trying to tailor and flex to make sure that we get it as well as we can within the resource we've got.
Thank you. I think we'll bring this item to an end now. We've covered a lot of ground. I feel like we could cover even more. There's so much in this sort of subject area. Very grateful to all officers and Councillor Widdowson for your time and contributions on this. How do members feel about having a short break, or do you want to crack on?
Before you just finish, can I just say I'm really grateful for the conversation and for the debate and for the support that it's showing to this service. And also, as you said earlier, Callum, you know, these guys do a fantastic job right the way across the city. So just like to say thanks for that as well.
Absolutely. Nice one. Cheers. Have a good evening. Shall we have a short break, everyone? 5 minutes. We'll have a 5-minute break. I'll tell you what, we'll start bang on 7 p.m. because we're sort of in between. Cheers. That'd be lovely. Yeah. Hello again. So here just resuming tonight's meeting of the Economy in Place Policy and Scrutiny Committee. We are on the agenda item looking at agenda item number 5, which is looking at a quarterly economic update. Presenting this, we've got Council Officer Simon Brereton and the executive member for this portfolio area, Councillor Ashley Mason. Welcome both. Similar to before, really, if you want to give a broad summary of the paper and any sort of new or interesting bits of information that might have arisen since the core information was put together in this, that'd be more than welcome. And then we'll ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start us off and then Simon, I'll just run through the paper. I suppose picking up from something you mentioned about delayed papers, I suppose this is almost the opposite, that by the time you get this, we're already on the next one. And hopefully that cover report does say that we're going to try and circulate them straight away. And hopefully maybe for the next municipal year, we can try and time them up a bit better. So as soon as it's gone through the decision session, it's coming to your next meeting, and it, you get it when it's kind of a bit more fresh or a bit more up to date. Because by the time I get it, it's always starting to go out of date, and then by this point, it's a long way off. But interesting, just rereading the paper, and obviously, again, some of those themes are still very much with us, particularly things around pressure on businesses, pressure on people. Just reading then on the Yorkshire Post about some pub chains closing, Revolution closing a couple of days a week. So those things are still are relevant. Simon, like I said, will go through it, and I suppose this is a format I've inherited from Councillor Waller, but something I do think is really interesting and gives a really broad brush of all different indicators, and particularly sometimes with a more focus on others as we go through that cycle of quarters. I'll pass over to Simon, and he'll just lead us through it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, councillors. And yeah, absolutely. This is the report from November last year. And I think probably we need to look at just where bringing this report to scrutiny fits into the schedule, because you'll know that the next report was published yesterday and it's going to Councillor Mason's decision session next week. So if we were in next month, for instance, you'd have been able to look at more up-to-date data. Nonetheless, most of the headings remain the same, and I'm happy to go through and talk in a bit more detail. We do tend to start with a bit of a deeper dive into one particular issue. And in November, we were looking at cost of living and the very scary at that time rise in energy prices. It's not any less scary, but it's not going up, it's just staying up, isn't it? Energy costs remain a really important issue, and then how that's affecting things like inflation. We talk in the report here about the estimate of inflation, which Centre for Cities have been doing on a city by city basis. And here we say, so back in August, inflation in York was estimated to be at 9.8%, which was slightly, which was lower than most places in the north, but above where it is in the south. The figure they have just the most recent figure that Centre for Cities are quoting is actually from November 22, and it's saying that inflation in York then was at 10.8%, so it gone up a further 1% in that month. Still the lowest in the north, apart from Warrington, I think in this case. They look at a mixture of things to try and calculate that. They look at increase in wages to see how much people have got in their pockets. They look at the way that the local energy use, so the extent to which people are driving and using fuel or walking or using other transport methods. And they also look at the quality of the housing stock as well as an estimate for how much it would cost to heat. So on that basis, York seems to score, well, I'm not going to say we're doing well, because 10.8% inflation is scary, isn't it? But, in comparison to if it's any comfort, in comparison to other places in the north, we seem to be quite not so terribly bad affected as other places, but nonetheless, it's scary. So having looked at inflation, we're then looking at move on to look at the claimant count and the number of vacancies in the city, and then We did a bit of a deeper dive in November into economic activity and what that meant. So job vacancies, we're doing a weekly count of, well, basically we go on the Indeed website every week and check how many jobs are advertised within 5 miles of York City Centre. It's around about 3,500 at any given point. So there are a lot of vacancies in businesses in the city. The claimant count has gone down from the high that we saw about a year into the pandemic. That was unemployment in York got up to about 5,000, which is above the rates it's been since the 80s. Now back down to hovering around the 2,500 mark for the claimant count. The figures since August as 22 is the last figure in this report. It's still at that level. I think reporting very similar level in the current quarterly economic update. So the claimant count has gone up about, before the pandemic, it was around about 1,800. So there are about 700 more people on benefits than there were before the pandemic, and that seems to be sticking. I can't tell you the detail why that is. It seems to be. It's not particularly young, but it's it's across all age ranges, and it's not gendered in terms of impacts there. There is a lot that's said around economic activity and around an increase in people who are simply decided not to work anymore, or who are long-term sick. Can see something of an increase in terms of so the figure 5 shows how those different figures have gone through since 2004. You can see that student numbers in York make up the most people who are what counted as economically inactive. But long-term sick is higher than it's certainly been for the last 10 or 15 years, although below the levels it was in the early 2000s. There's a lot of emphasis at the moment from government policy in terms of trying to get people to stop people from being economically active and get them working again. The number of people working in York is actually at the highest recorded ever level. It's about 93,000 people working in York on the last count. So there are things happening in terms of employment and economic activity that are particularly well explained by standard economic theory, which suggests that there's loads of jobs, there's loads of people out of work. The two things should naturally match. That is not what's happening at the moment. We know that in York, it's household income really that we need to look at. It's not just whether you've got a job or not, it's who else is earning in the house that you're in. It's that we know, I think we'd all acknowledge we're an expensive place to live, and that people have to work as hard as they can to earn the money that they need to live here. That's reflected in, it is reflected in household incomes and reflected in pay figures in York. They haven't said in this particular report a huge amount of about pay. We'll go into a bit more detail in that in the latest report, which the figures have come out since the November report in terms of average earnings in York. What we're seeing in terms of the economy around high levels of job vacancies and the costs of doing business are reflected in what we're hearing back from the business community. That's dealt with in the section on business intelligence. Costs and recruitment, energy prices and premises are all continue to be things that businesses want to talk to us about. We've highlighted in here some of the work we've done and continue to do with the rail sector. It's now some time since the GBR bid was put in to bring the headquarters of that organisation to York. No movement on that. We had an internal meeting today to work out where to go next on that. There's no space, we're told, on the government's legislative programme to get the bill in that's needed to set up British Railways. And there doesn't seem to be a massive appetite to announce things about the future of the rail. I guess there are other more immediate challenges that are facing those that are trying to run our rail industry at the moment, beyond thinking longer term. But we would like to get attention back onto the importance of the rail sector for York, and hopefully get government to announce that they will surely do the right thing and bring GBR to the right place, which is York. November was the month where we held our York Business Festival, and we set out in this report something about what was happening. I can tell you we ran about 30 events and got over 1,000 people attending events across the city, looking at the themes across our economic strategy. It was a great way to engage people and businesses, and to get them involved in thinking about the future of the York economy, and will continue to be that strategy will clearly guide what we do for the next 10 years, so really important. We're also touching here on a particular event we were doing around Small Business Saturday. It was a great opportunity to highlight the independent businesses in York that are so important to our economy. And then we talk about inward investment, some old inward investment leads we're looking at there. We did some interesting work with York, Nebraska. York, Nebraska is a village of about 4,000 people. They approached us to see if they might have an economic partnership with us. We managed to connect the Nebraska sorghum industry with the university and the Bio Yorkshire initiative. So we've made something of that opportunities. We try to make something of every opportunity that comes our way. There is a little bit about the end of COVID funding in here, and the additional relief fund, and an early update in terms of UK Shared Prosperity Fund. That's moved on quite a lot since the last report, and I'm sure you'll be aware that work's now beginning, or about to begin, on Front Street in terms of doing some improvements there. And we have we've just run an expression of interest phase to get people to bid in to run projects using that £5 million worth of funding, and oversubscribed by a factor of 10. So lots of people interested in running projects in York to help develop and grow the economy, and to make it more inclusive as well. A huge amount of detail in there, and a little bit out of date, but happy to answer any questions you've got, and hopefully it gives a platform to ask what you'd like to know more about what's happening in terms of the economy.
Thank you, Simon, and Councillor Mason. Do appreciate that summary. I've got a hand from Councillor Hook. Councillor Hook, off you go.
Thank you. I was just wondering, the job vacancies, is there any detail where they are? Because you hear all these tales of people who stop working doing the caring jobs and the very important jobs that are still low paid, because they can go and stack shelves in the supermarket for the same money and no stress or anything. Is there any data on that, the split between the vacancies?
It's possible to do a little bit of that using the terms that Indeed, I mean, I'd say this is from Indeed's job site rather than a kind of what somebody from the Office for National Statistics would recognise as a good data set, but nonetheless it's quite helpful. You can look at it in terms of pay rates of pay. So obviously jobs are advertised at a particular rate, so you can look at it by that. And the jobs are, there's not been an increase in lower paid jobs and a decrease in higher paid jobs. It's a similar levels, and you can look for particular buzzwords within there. So something like half of those jobs are actually in hospitality and retail businesses. So half of them are kind of city centre service economy jobs. The rest are split across all sorts of different sectors. You know, if we talk to, yes, you're absolutely right. Those care companies are finding it hard to recruit the kind of people that they need to do the hugely important work of social care. And at the moment, it's not, you know, it's not reflected in salaries how important that work is to us, and that does create some challenges. Equally, if you go and talk to some of the tech companies in the city about recruiting computer programmers and things, they are finding that very difficult as well. And it's jobs really across the piece. York does attract people that want to work in York. We also know it's challenge, as I've alluded to before, it's an expensive place to live and people need to earn as much as they possibly can. But we are part of a UK economy, not just part of a York economy. So, yeah. So we've not seen an increase in particular sectors. It's spread across the whole of the economy, but about half those jobs, I say, are actually in the service economy in the city centre and hospitality and retail.
Thank you. Councillor Dave Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. I was looking at the paragraphs on inward investment, and I noticed 6 new overseas inquiries. It seems like things might be starting to happen again with potential overseas inward investment. You could comment upon that if you wish. My other question is really not related to the quarter, because the wheels of inward investment run ever much slowly and wider. And I wonder whether you have any updates about inward investments, inquiries of potential for York Central, perhaps particularly government work.
I'd start by saying I'm delighted to be able to say we now have a head of inward investment, Tony Corby, who's just started at the beginning of January. I'm sure he'll be somebody that you'd be interested in meeting in due course. And Tony is working up, we've done some work on the inward investment strategy, which I think we took to Councillor Waller's decision session in November before last. So he'll be updating that strategy, which is absolutely very much focusing on York Central as a really important piece. We're looking forward to hearing from the York Central partnership in terms of the next stage of work that they'll be doing in terms of getting development partners on board to start getting some buildings up that can get jobs into them. We've been working to try and influence how they go about that, and we'll do far more on that in due course. We've been working with partners recently as well, and next week there's a really nice piece of film that the BID have organised for partners across the cities being launched on I think next Tuesday. A lot of interest. Well over 100 people have signed up to come along to see the launch of that film and to see how they can get more involved in promoting York to the outside world and focusing on inward investment. In terms of, you ask about government jobs. That's I touched on GBR, which is a certain type of government job that we're hoping to come to York. We are still hoping to hear very soon that there will be some kind of government hub announced for York Central. And I think if you look at the hoardings that are up now, it actually talks about them on there, although there hasn't been a government announcement about that. So hopefully there's a clue on the hoardings. There's potential for quite a significant number of civil service jobs to come to York, and we've been working with the civil service over the last probably 2 or 3 years now. They have a project called Places for Growth, which is about getting civil service jobs out of London and into the regions and getting to the position where you could have a career as a civil servant without ever having to go to London. There's been a lot of nervousness from civil servants around that because they have had bad experience. For instance, they moved the Office for National Statistics to Newport and found that actually all the people that they were employing didn't really want to go and live in Newport. So it caused them a problem for a number of years. I guess the upshot of that is it's probably created more jobs for people in Newport than it would otherwise, because the risk with them moving a government department is always simply that you just move their employments with you. They're very focused on how can we avoid that kind of situation and how can we make sure we really are embedding something. So we've been working with the civil service over the last 2 or 3 years to help them recruit people into some of the programs that they are running in York. Things like the Active Travel England, which isn't beginning, I think it's not quite moving to this building yet, but they are beginning to recruit up things, and it is beginning to create more jobs for people in York to apply for as well. So I think that's positive.
I think it is a case of having that critical mass where people can move about, and perhaps not just York, but the wider area, the other cities nearby.
Yeah.
That Newport suffered from.
Yeah.
But I think it's a message that we have to refresh, not only with the civil service, but with the change of governments as well.
Absolutely. So we're really gearing up our work around inward investment at the moment. We've got a new head of inward investment. The new head of economy and regeneration actually has a background in inward investment work as well, and we've gone from trying to cover it within my already overstretched team into actually having some dedicated resource on that. So it's good timing in terms of York Central coming to the fore. But that's not the only place that people are interested in. It's also helpful that we're now nearly in a position where the local plan process is concluded, because that enables us to talk to developers with a bit more certainty about what's available in York and things. But there is a lot of interest from all sorts of businesses, from the rail sector in terms of coming here. We had a delegation from the German rail industry, that would have been last summer. And that's turning into there's a reciprocal trip with some York businesses going out to Germany to see if they can drum up work over there.
That's very good, because that was a grave concern with Brexit, that we might end up with disinvestment rather than inward investment. But thank you. That sounds very promising. Thank you, Sam.
So York seems to be attractive still to the outside world, and we're taking our really step change in terms of what we can do with investment with a new team in place.
Thank you. I've got a supplementary from Councillor Kilbane.
Yeah, it's just on the inward investment question, and it's great to see all of the inquiries and different organisations that we're talking to.
Yeah.
Have we actually had any inward investment though? I suppose the period of the last 3 months, probably a bit unfair to look at that. How much inward investment have we actually had in the city over the last year?
I won't attempt to drum up an answer for that here. We'll come back to back.
Has there been any?
Oh yes,
okay.
yes.
Okay, so I'm assuming not in the last.
There have been a whole series of government teams that have started locating themselves in here on the back of that Places for Growth.
Okay. I'm assuming not in the last 3 months, otherwise it'd be in the report. Well, you know, it'd be good to know how much over the last year and how many jobs that's created. That'd be good.
But I'd say we, alongside the economic strategy, we're now pulling together a new indicator set, and we're looking at how we integrate that into the scorecards. I mean, beyond this report, of course, there is a scorecard on the KPI machine around the economy, which you'll have access to as councillors. We want to update that and make it work better with our economic strategy and give you more of that kind of direct information about how the economy is going, rather than how there are about 200 indicators, I think, on the KPI machine for the economy at the moment, but it doesn't include things like how many actual jobs have been created through inward investment in the last year.
It's fair to say the pandemic's probably scuppered a lot of plans for companies moving about, certainly internationally, I would have thought.
Councillor Mason, did you want to respond?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's a fair point in terms of how do we show that kind of bang we get for our buck, I suppose you might call it. Maybe the strategy paper that's coming from the new officer could have some form of looking back over that period between the last strategy to say what has been achieved in that time.
I think that would be helpful in instilling confidence, and it could almost create a positive cycle, give other people, more inclination to consider York, perhaps, if they know others are. Councillor Pearson.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, and thanks, Simon, for the report. Councillor Dayton touched on it towards the end of his question about the impact of Brexit, and I think a lot of national politicians don't want to talk about it, but it's still an issue that's close to my heart. I suppose my question is, the pandemic has muddied waters, trying to understand what the impact of Brexit is on the economy. nationally that, you know, numerous organisations have said that they've noticed a slowdown in some businesses or relocations or new offices opening up in Europe because they need to be within a single market. I'm just wondering if you had any intel on what's happening in York and how that's affecting York businesses. I don't know if you heard anything, for example, at the business festival in November. Were you getting any anecdotal feedback around that kind of issue?
I think it's mixed, isn't it? But if you look at some of the European-owned businesses in York, so I'm thinking of, there's a really great business called ETAS, which is based on Fulford Road, which is a subsidiary of Bosch. It makes the software it develops is the operating systems that cars use for, you know, anything you've got a computer in a car. Modern cars, that's just about everything, runs their software. There are more instances of their software running than there are on Facebook. Last year, Bosch decided that ETAS would be their global centre for excellence for embedded software, and they've been recruiting and expanding their operations in York gradually over the last year. There are rail engineering firms in York that are expanding at the moment. You'll recall there's been some toing and froing with Nestle around. First of all, they made an announcement at UK level about closing some of their plants, but actually slowly expanding York. And there's more of a concentration from Nestle in terms of jobs in York as well. So on the other hand, there are a lot of people who aren't in York anymore who've returned to who were here as Europeans happening to live here. So there are pluses and minuses, but we're certainly not seeing a whole series of European-owned firms or firms that trade with Europe saying we can't do this anymore. The kind of anecdotal stuff is good, and I remain confident. That's partly because that's the kind of person I am, but also because, you know, the York economy is a good, strong economy. Doesn't mean it's cheap to live here, and it doesn't mean that everybody can have, and everybody couldn't have a better job. But actually, as an economy, it's pretty solid, and the focus that York gets as a good place to live and do business is only getting stronger and louder, I would say. We're getting far more interest from the likes of Department for International Trade that works with everywhere in the UK and everywhere around the world. We used to struggle to get attention because all in the north they wanted to talk to Leeds and Manchester. Well, actually now they're coming and looking at York and thinking, well, actually there's loads of opportunities here. So I'm pretty confident about where we are. There are some businesses that have seen some very difficult times, and that's not to pretend that's not there, but there's also a lot of strength there as well, and a lot of companies that are actually growing the kind of jobs that we would like to see in the city.
Thank you. Councillor Kilbane.
Thank you. Just a couple, Simon. One's more of a comment. I admire greatly your optimism about the Great British Railways headquarters still coming to York, but where I'm sat, it looks as though the government led York up to the top of the hill and just left them there, you know, all interested in it, all comments about it. And actually that is pretty disgraceful given the time, effort and money that we put into, all of us put into trying to secure that HQ in York. But I admire the fact that you're still on it and trying to bring it here, although the government seems to have forgotten about it. Just in terms of the Cabinet Office coming to York, allegedly, I don't think they've actually put that on the hoardings, have they? But that is the word elsewhere on the street. I've been talking to people in hospitality, and it's something I've got experience of myself running a hospitality business, that, you know, we're paying the most wages that the business will allow because staff are incredibly difficult to source and keep. And I was thinking, well, it's the competition from the supermarkets or whatever, but I was talking to quite a well-known hotelier, runs a big hotel in York, and he said, no, the problem is that he's doing the same thing, but the staff can't afford to live in the city. So and he blames a range of issues for that, Airbnbs, pricing people out, etc. But so what he's resorted to is actually putting people in, because it's the only way that you can get staff. When you're first recruited, you will get to stay in a very posh hotel for the first 3 months of your employment, because they're trying to keep hold of the staff. And while we'll all welcome the high quality jobs that the Cabinet Office or whoever comes to York will bring, it will increase pressure greatly on that housing market. And it's almost the more successful we are for business, then the worse it gets for people, especially at the lower end of the earnings, to be able to afford to live in the city. And I'm just wondering, isn't it time that we joined up the sort of the business plan that we have for the city to bring in inward investment and create high paying jobs? Do we need to be working a bit more closely with the sort of housing aspect of that? Because sort of normal people just can't afford to live in the city anymore. And that's has a knock-on effect for the businesses.
I mean, that those issues are not dealt with, but certainly touched on and covered in the economic strategy. It is an important question. How you go about producing cheaper housing in York is a big challenge, and is not something that the market is going to do if left to its own devices. If you double the number of houses in York, you simply double the number of expensive houses in York, unless you did something to control how much they cost and who lived in them. York's relatively expensive compared to the places around us, but still average in terms of the south of England, so cheap compared to London. I don't know how somebody running the Angel on the Green in Islington gets any staff at all, because London accommodation costs are something like 4 times what they are in York, but wages aren't 4 times higher. So there are challenges all over the place, and there's probably more in common between us and some of those places in the south and how they try and deal with the cost of housing and the disparity in wages than there is in terms of what we can learn from Leeds or Manchester or Selby or Thirsk or whatever. I don't think there's any answers in there. The reasons for all of those aren't really to do with York. They're to do with the economic system that we work in and national policy around things like house building. The extent to which we can control those locally and have economic levers that we can pull to do much around that is limited. So that leaves us simply to try and get more better paid jobs in York, and to try and make sure that the people of York can access those jobs, whether that's through providing the right kind of skills and environment to them, or whether that's working on recruitment issues with those businesses that come here. But yeah, York is a difficult place to live if you're on low wages. But there's no argument with that.
Yes, of course, Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks for that, Simon. It might be really useful if the next report you bring, which is going to look at wages, isn't it? It's going to look at incomes. If that could be done in terms of wage rates across the city in different areas of the city, so we can see where those inequalities are.
I don't think we have that kind of data to play with, unfortunately. What we have are survey-based data at a York level. So it doesn't tell us how pay is different in different parts of the city. It simply gives us a City of York average pay figure. Various different, within that you can look at low pay and high pay, but only across the whole of York. Okay. What I earn is between me and my employer. Some assumptions are made in terms of doing so. The annual survey of hours and earnings, which is the most detailed piece of work there is based on a sample of about 1,000 PAYE returns, anonymised at a York resident and a York employee level, and the data just isn't there to do a more detailed survey. You would have to actually start doing door-to-door surveys and talking to people on that level.
But if we could include that data, it'd be a start, wouldn't it?
That's what the next report covers.
Thank you. And any more questions on this item? Take that as a no, even though Dave Taylor seems to have something on his mind. Thank you both for your time and answers this evening. It's much appreciated.
Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Dave Taylor asked my question, but we have one more item on this agenda now, which we'll move to. Have a good evening, both. Thanks again. Which is so the next item, item 6, which is a finance and performance monitor 2, Q2. It's another report that is sort of slightly out of sync, given how the calendar of scrutiny meetings falls. But I welcome James Gilchrist back to the table and Mr. Patrick Looker. If you're able to give a very rough summary, let's take the papers as read. Well, I'll ask you some questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm Patrick Looker, I'm Head of Service Finance at the Council. So one of the areas I look after the finances are the Place Directorate. So this report, as you say, went to executive on the 22nd of November. So this is reporting data up to the end of September, sort of middle of October time. So it's fair to say it's slightly out of date, but it's broadly in line with where we continue to be. Paragraph 5, I think, details the main inflationary pressures that the Directorate has been facing over the year. Obviously, energy prices have been significantly higher than we'd assumed as part of the budget. We've had £1.8 million of unbudgeted costs across electricity, gas and fuel for the vehicles. Probably the best example to give you is street lighting, where energy costs of about 700,000 last year are likely to be 1.4 million this year. So that's a £700,000 hit straight away. Cost of heating, lighting and powering West offices has increased by about £350,000. So we're talking very significant increases in costs that effectively happened post the budget being set last year. So the Directorate has been facing significant inflationary pressures, but to some extent been very fortunate in a couple of other areas. Parking income has remained incredibly strong this financial year. Every single month this year, up to the end of September, and probably not giving too much away that it's continued onto Christmas. You'll know how busy York was, has been higher than any other equivalent month in any previous year. We are seeing very strong parking income levels within the city. And income's been about 20% over budget for the majority of the year. The other area we've had sort of windfall income has been the sale of recyclates. The price of recyclates, particularly over the summer, were double the level that they were in previous years. They're slightly slowing down now, but we've been forecasting in the region of an extra £1 million worth of income from recyclate sales and other waste disposal income. So effectively, we've had those pressures in one side. We've had some better performing income areas. So we are forecasting an overspend of about £600,000. We reported to the executive that it would be zero. We are hopeful that through mitigating cost measures, improved income position, use of external funding that we've been very successful in getting across UK Shared Prosperity, the bus service improvement plan and other DFT income, that we should be able to bring the budget down to zero, particularly if you consider across other parts of the council, particularly in social care, there's very significant pressures across the council. The report also includes the performance data as at that point in time. And more than happy to answer any specific questions you might have. James is probably better for the performance because a lot of the areas are his area, but happy for questions.
Thank you. I'll start with one. It's a little bit niche. It's on I think paragraph 46, where it mentions that CYC have entered into a trial with Virgin O2 to assist with the cleansing and painting of their utilities boxes. I think we've just struck up a similar or the same agreement with the Environment Agency. And in my mind, I'm thinking, right, well, A, it's good that the job's being done and that graffiti is not being left, fair play. But B, if we're doing it on other organisations' property, they should be paying us handsomely for that if they're not willing to do it themselves. So what are the numbers like in those kinds of arrangements? Do the council get paid for every bit of fence that they clean, or is it an annual lump sum? I'm thinking, is it a useful income stream potentially?
Yes.
We have Network Rail as well. They're not always responsive when it comes to stuff like this.
So we are keen to do it with as many of those private companies or national organisations as we can, so that we can try to have a York standard for how quickly we deal with graffiti, because to a resident, they don't really care whose it is, where it is, they just want it gone. So we're trying to tackle it from that perspective. So the arrangements vary slightly, I think, from organisation to organisation, but yes, they pay us as a minimum. Patrick wouldn't let me sign the deal if it lost us money. So it as a minimum, we break even on those sort of service level agreements with those organisations, whether they're utility companies or sort of national bits of infrastructure. As I say, each agreement varies slightly, but they pay us, and they pay us as an income stream. I wouldn't say it makes us masses of money. I don't think it's an income stream that will solve our financial challenges, but it certainly helps, and it improves the responsiveness, which is where this started from as a driver.
Yeah. Thank you, James. I mean, I know it's not in the grand scheme of things gonna decide the council's fortunes, but when every pound matters, it is a point of interest. Any other members got Dave Taylor?
You aren't offering to go out and graffiti some boxes there, where you can. Can I draw your attention to page 45 and the table thereon? It's pleasing to note the percentage of vacant city centre shops is fairly low, surprisingly low, really. It seems to have gone up in the latest data rather than going down, but it's only a small change in the percentage. I was looking also at the previous page, paragraph 11, that states that there is a forecast shortfall in income on commercial property of about £300,000. Now that's obviously our property, not across the city, but is do you see an anomaly there?
We've been very successful with the income levels across the commercial portfolio. So within the pandemic, we still managed to let the majority of our properties. I think there's been one or two shops that have closed and the tenants have left. We were trying to keep them going. They've left. We'll be able to re-let them, but there's some income that we've lost around there. I think the impact of the pandemic on the racecourse, they're a very big payer. There were fewer days racing, which led to a reduction in the amount that they were paying. So I think it's a relatively small proportion of the overall budget. I think an element of it is a one-off hit in 22-23, which is picking up from issues that happened in previous years. But we do budget.
This has a forecast shortfall
for this financial year. Yes, as some of the rents we've had to write off because they weren't
Because
able
of
to
previous.
year's pay.
Okay.
But we do effectively budget for a pretty much fully let commercial estate, which obviously does put a risk on the council.
Thank you. Councillor Kilbane.
Thanks, Councillor Taylor, and other Councillor Taylor. You're doing very well at asking other people's questions tonight, just before them. Can I still on page 43, there is a reduction in res park income from visitor badges and season tickets. I mean, to my mind, that would be because now that you don't have to show a badge, less people are buying them and just trying to get away without paying. Is that the reason why we've had a drop in income from res park visitor badges?
Well, in terms of visitor badges, I think a lot of it is down to fewer people travelling to see or to need to go to where they were going previously. We have seen a significant reduction in people working in offices. There's a view that a number of the visitor badges used to be used by commuter parking for some instances. But we have seen a reduction in the numbers that have been sold. I don't know if James wants to.
I don't think there's necessarily a correlation between we're not seeing an increase in income from parking enforcement particularly, which would correlate because parking enforcement are still doing checks regardless of whether they're virtual or not. I think the fact that traffic levels across the piece are significantly down is probably linked to it. I know we haven't got the data in this pack, but within the pack is a line which shows that traffic levels are down across all modes and generally speaking.
The previous line is that car parking income is up 20% ahead of budget.
Yeah, car parking income is, but if you look at page 47, there's the area-wide traffic levels, which shows that, you know, there's a significant drop from 1.77 million in the peak hours to 1.34. Now, I appreciate we haven't got the data for 21-22 yet, but that's showing quite a drop-off of the amount of movements of traffic we've got across the city generally.
So traffic levels are down, but parking income's up.
Yeah.
So we think people are just
I think
staying for longer.
No, I think traffic has changed massively in response to the pandemic. So working from home is a thing, not just within the council. Many of our big employers are doing work from home. That's driving short-term commutes in a different way. It's driving rail and public transport in a different way. Our parking income is now massively different on Saturdays to every other day. So that's visitors to the city centre. They are by far and away our peak days, when it used to be a lot more of a flat spread across the week. So we are seeing just behaviours changing and the way people move about changing. I think that's partly a consequence of the pandemic. I think it's partly a consequence of the changing nature of the way many people work, you know, whether it's ourselves or some of the insurance companies in the city. They're all starting to move to a level of hybrid working.
Thank you.
So just on that yet. So I mean, it actually came up when I was knocking on doors today. What we're being told by residents is that it's getting harder to park in the res park areas. And you know, I was talking to a guy today who gets home from work at 11 o'clock and he can't park in his street. So it doesn't really square with there being less cars in the res park. What we're hearing on the ground doesn't really square with there being less visitor parking. So I would suggest it's actually people just not paying for the permits because you don't have to display them anymore and chancing it and chancing to revisit the previous scrutiny, the fact that the system doesn't work all the time to be able to enforce it.
Well, I think it works vast majority of the time. And as I say, I think you would see a drive up in enforcement income, which I don't think we're seeing a massive uptick in res park enforcement income.
Thank you. It's worth reminding anybody watching that we do have those recommendations from the previous meeting on res park, which we'll be following up on. Councillor Daubney.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, James, for your thumbnail sketch of the way the parking's changed. Obviously, £1 million greater income is very substantial. and very welcome, because clearly there are other parts of the budget which are, I'm sure you're acutely aware, overspent. Do we have any sense that that increased parking income will continue into next year and the year after? Or is it something which is too hard to predict that we can't rely upon increasing our budget forecast?
I'd be very cautious of significantly increasing the budget forecast. There certainly has been a step change pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. So as certainly what we noticed last summer when controls were taken off and people were able to travel around, people were desperate to get out, and York seemed to be one of the places that they were coming to. So the summer holidays, particularly school holidays, York was a very, very popular place to go. You weren't able to go abroad, or if you could go abroad, but it was probably quite complicated. So people did more staycations. We've kind of seen that continue through this financial year, but I'm still expecting at some point the cost of living pressures that will mean that there's less disposable money in people's pockets, and therefore we're going to see some form of downturn. I think we've also been receiving income due to, there's still a reluctance to get back on public transport. We need to try and turn that around. We've got initiatives through the bus service improvement plan to get more people back into the buses. There's been impact on rail this year. There's been rail strikes. They've been aimed at weekends a lot of the time. So people have been coming into York on the car when they've not been able to trust the trains. So I think there's a lot of one-off issues, which from a financial perspective, if this income continues, fantastic, it supports the council and council expenditure, but doesn't necessarily go forward with some of our other transport policies, which are also very important to our councillors.
Thank you, Patrick. That's very helpful.
Councillor Kilbane.
It's just, yeah, and we're surely going to see that squeeze on pockets, aren't we? Because just looking at the median earnings on 45, I think they've gone up by about 4% over a period of 10% inflation. Just what were you saying about the buses? What I was really pleased to see in this report is the bus journeys are up, sort of year on year, and park and ride is up. And I hope somebody's, telling that to the bus companies. But on the other hand, you're saying it's not in a good place. Can you just explain a bit more on that?
Well, paragraph 30 says that park and ride customers total 0.74 for the Q2, but this is below the pre-pandemic levels of 1.1 million. So we haven't got back to the levels of bus use. And a lot of that is due to commuting and work from home. So the park and ride is particularly, well, this is probably a James question rather than me, but the park and ride was always during the early morning peak. It was taking people into town to work, and the rest of the day was getting the visitors. The people coming into the office haven't returned to the levels that were there previously, and that's probably where we're slightly down still.
Yeah, they're suffering from a work at home shift as well, and we're seeing a rebalancing of transport generally, I think, in response to that, and that will affect every mode.
Thank you. I've got a question. Again, quite sort of, well, depending on your outlook, it's sort of back on the sort of place side of things, and it's about trees being planted. Again, it's not going to make or break the city's economy or the council's finances, but I note the numbers provided here. During 2021, there were 70 trees planted, compared to 271 in 2020 to 21. And I'm wondering, do we count how many trees we cut down? And is that number a sort of net gain, or is it just how many trees we planted? Because I'm sure in every ward, every month or every few weeks, there is, 1 or 2 trees do go, and it's a growing anxiety that I have, that there's a sort of gradual loss of these things that we're sort of not quite on top of. So it'd be good if the council does keep track of where it's cutting them down. I know that's a really specific thing, but I'm interested.
I'm sure that we will know the council trees that we have felled.
So I'm fairly confident we will have that as a data set. So we can look at how that is portrayed as a net gain and net loss with the performance team.
So you think those numbers there are literally just those that we've planted?
That's the way I'm reading it. I need to do a bit of work, but I can have a chat with the guys who run the tree asset database and the performance team, see whether that's something we could look at as a development to that data.
Yeah, I think it'd be much more useful, but appreciate that, James. Thank you. Any other questions, Councillor Kilbane?
It's a recurring question for me on page 48, in terms of the cycling. Where there's a lot less cycling going on now than there used to be in the 2010s. The Tour de France is often used as a reason for that. Whereas the Tour de France was in 2014, and as we know, cycling peaked in York in 2014 and has been in steady decline ever since, and continues to be so, as we can see by this report. What do you mean the impact of the Tour de France had on cycling rates?
So whenever you have a big event, so whether it's the Olympics or when it happened in London, whether it's Wimbledon and tennis participation, you see a peak around big sporting events of participation of the public. So, you know, I'm not surprised that there is a peak at that point, but like all modes, you know, in some ways, the local modes of walking and cycling are some of the most hit by working from home. So a lot of the workforce who will live locally don't make those journeys anymore if they're working from home. So it's often skewed by that. It's obviously been a decline since 2014, but it's a more marked decline, certainly since the pandemic, which, as I say, I think all modes are affected by that work from home piece. As we've seen, all the transport levels are being affected by that.
I still don't quite understand, James. So cycling was steadily increasing from 2010 all the way up to 2014, and then it fell and fairly dramatically continues to fall. Are you saying it's almost like, right, well, I mean, there's an increase up to 2014. Are you saying like the Tour de France happened and everyone went, oh, that's it, we've had enough of cycling now? Well, I mean, I just don't understand really.
No, I think it's a classic bell curve of activity you get around a major sporting event. It's what I would expect around Wimbledon. You will see a peak of people playing tennis on tennis courts up to the point of Wimbledon. So they ramp up and then they drop off. And it's that classic bell curve statistic thing for me.
So I really struggle to understand how we increased cycling for 4 years consistently year on year, and then one event seemed to have this huge impact on it. I don't understand why it's listed as a reason, to be honest with you.
But it's part of the narrative. I'm not saying it's the only reason. I'm sure there are a whole raft of reasons why people do and don't partake in cycling.
To be honest, it seems to me kind of scrabbling around for a reason, because it just doesn't make any logical sense.
Well, what I do is look in the bike sheds at the council, and 3 years ago it was packed. Now there's hardly any bicycles.
But I don't think that's because of the Tour de France.
No, it's nothing. No, it's to do with the pandemic and the impact of working from home.
I think the data on cycling shows that the pandemic is kind of in the middle of it, but it's a steady decline, and we're still seeing that.
I mean, I should say, you know, not to stick the boot in too aggressively. When I read that paragraph, I thought, well, the one thing that's missing there is a comment on serious investment in active travel infrastructure. It's the paragraph to me feels like a slight lack of ownership in that decline in cycling. It's not a question, is it? It's just more my interpretation of it. Yeah, work to be done there, absolutely. Any more questions from members? No, in which case, Councillor Kilbane.
I just didn't want to hog it, that's all. Just another one in terms of on page 52 with the carbon emissions. Given that on page 50 we're basically sort of standing still in carbon emission reductions, how confident are you in that prediction of carbon emissions suddenly basically falling off the cliff face to get down to to net zero. How confident are you in that particular piece of information in the graph on page 52?
My initial reaction is to achieve that, we're going to need some very challenging policy decisions. So there will be some changes that happen as technology changes, as national policy changes, but I think York will have to make some challenging policy decisions to achieve that. I think what's really important is a close, I know we've discussed this at other scrutinies, is a close feedback loop so that you can keep a close eye on that to understand the policy decisions that need to be made to achieve it.
What kind of policy decisions?
Well, whether they're across transport, whether they're across housing, whether they are across the main contributors, they will need to be policy decisions that drive that down. And you need to look at, you know, what is an appropriate measure today might not be in 3 years' time, definitely will be in 5 years' time. So it's keeping that feedback loop to see what's changing at a government policy level, what's changing through technology anyway, and what is it we need to do to achieve those targets. If that makes sense.
And there's some bold future administrations. Councillor Dave Taylor.
It was seen that dualling the ring road probably isn't going to help with that carbon pathway.
So there's a carbon assessment as part of the planning application from memory, which shows a relatively neutral impact of it. So generally people, the sitting standing still in traffic is a contributor to carbon. So half the trick is trying to get existing traffic moving without attracting more traffic to a carriageway.
Yeah, I do understand that, but of course, more road space just brings more traffic. Anyway, there's a bit of a side point.
And likely more opportunities to get into that one. Thank you, Councillor Dave Taylor. Any more questions from colleagues around the table? Thank you both, Patrick and James, for your time and contributions tonight. Very much appreciate it. Committee members, next item is work plan. No, there was a supplementary paper covering that, and that's simply because the prospective item on the bus service improvement plan update was genuinely just accidentally left off. It was just an error, so it's been added back on. You'll recall from the last meeting we didn't decide to take it off the work plan, so it remains on the work plan. And at our commission slot on the 30th of January, I'd like us to just confirm what we'll look at in March, because buses have been in the press a lot recently and our residents have a lot of concerns on it. BSIP's very much a thing as well. So if we can maybe justify getting it on in March, that'd be helpful. But let's come back to that conversation on the 30th, if that's okay, everyone. Councillor Kilbane.
Can I just ask, how many more meetings have we got left before Purda?
Those two on there, yeah.
So if we are going to have some impact on the bus thing, it needs to, okay, it needs to be on the 8th. Okay. All right, thanks.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love many more meetings before Purda because I quite enjoy these and all of your company, but that's, yeah, actually, that'd be helpful. Yeah, if you can. Sorry, for those who couldn't hear the officer then, they're going to see if there's any more commission slots available, possibly to look at that item or others. We have quite a long wish list of items, but that's the nature of these things. There's always too many things to talk about and not enough time. Councillor Kilbane.
I mean, I think it would be excellent before Purda if we could get some of the bus operators here, wouldn't it? That would be a good thing to do.
We have not.
Okay.
Certainly note that, Councillor Kilbane. Yeah, we'll liaise in between now and the commission meeting. But thank you all, everyone. I don't have any urgent business unless anyone else does. Appreciate all of your time as ever. Cheers.